Babe, wake up, we got a FNAF Timeline review before GTA 6. What if that's just the intro? Like, what if I make that the intro? No one can stop me. I have free will. What if that's the intro? Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, RyeToast, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's like we always do. As I mentioned in last week's episode, today is the finale of the Timeline mini-series of this podcast. A little bit of housekeeping for FNAF news. We are T-minus 8 days for Escape the Pizzaplex, which is big. And I just, in case anyone's watching this in the future, first off, good luck pooping. I wish you the best. And second, this is before Escape the Pizzaplex is out, and this is 2 months before Secret of the Mimic comes out. So expect things to be missing and some things to be wrong. But this is as it stands, the timeline I have in my own head. Yeah, I guess we're just going to get into it. I grabbed a couple questions, and I'm going to try to remember to bring them up as they become relevant for the timeline, because I specifically, there were some people who sent in timeline specific questions, and I thank you, and I brought those up. And then there's other people who just have questions that do relate to the timeline. I mean, after all, the timeline is all the lore, you know? But yeah, let's just get into it. One final note before we really dive deep. This is the last week you can get the Mark plushie. If you have not yet, please think about doing so. We need to get to 200, and we're very close. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but if we get to 400 somehow, my percentage goes up, which is huge. But you know, regardless, I understand the economy is kind of in shambles right now, so if you can't get one, that's fine. And I also, again, want to thank everybody for the reception that RyeTwost has been getting. Since posting those gameplay videos and shorts, y'all have been watching them and enjoying it, so I thank you very much. If you don't know what I'm talking about, recently I stopped streaming on YouTube and Twitch at the same time because it was hard to keep track of both chats, and just the numbers made more sense to only stream on Twitch, but then take those streams and edit some of the fat off, you know, cut down the BRBs, the silences, the slow parts, and make that like a more packaged piece of content. So yeah, and you guys have been enjoying it so far, and that means the world to me, so thank you very much for that. The scripted videos will come eventually. I'm just trying to get a backlog set up so that I'm not scraping everything by the skin of my teeth, and we'll see if I can keep that up. Anyway, let's get into a timeline. So I thought the best way to structure this is I'm just going to go bar for bar what the timeline I think is, and when there are questions related to parts of it that I have pulled up, we will talk about them. So without any further ado, the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline as I see it. There's a lot of speculation, as there must be. There's a lot of guesswork, as there must be. And there's some missing points in there. I didn't even bother guessing what happens in Secret of the Mimic or Escape the Pizzaplex. I just denoted when they happen, you know, because in 2 months, I'm just going to add them to the slideshow. So let's get into it. Before and up to 1979, something happens with the Mimic. It's the titular secret that we see in the trailer that's coming out in the game in 2 months. Maybe this is the creation of the Mimic, and the secret is, you know, like I said in my one video, the secret of the Mimic is not necessarily something it's done, but rather the secret for how it works. You know, that's a possibility. Or there was some accident. I'm leaning on accident in the idea of the Fall Fest fire. And that was in the most recent video of like, if these felt suits were used by Fazbear in Fall Fest in these dry conditions around candles, maybe that felt suit caught fire, and that's why they shifted to metal suits afterwards. Things that would be fireproof. But regardless, after whatever this event is, the Mimic and all of its costumes are locked away, never to be used again until far off in the future. That being said, the Mimic programming was still influential for a lot of the early programming of the Fazbear animatronics. And we know that Fall Fest either only took place in 1983 and I say at least 9 years. Was it 1974? I thought the poster was Fall Fest 1970. I gotta double check this immediately. This is also me just going over my own stuff. 1970. At least 13 years. What am I talking about here? Oh, because 1979. Doi. Yeah, because we know Fall Fest. We have a Fall Fest poster for 1970, and we have the Help Wanted Fall Fest banner for 1983. So it's likely, I would assume, that this was a annual tradition that happened for at least 13 years, but it is also possible that there was just 2 of them, or maybe Fall Fest 83 isn't real because it's within Help Wanted. We really don't know. We also know Fredbear's Family Diner is established sometime in the 70s. Now, this could be technically anywhere up until 1982, because we know it opened before Freddy's. But other than that, I would think it's been around for a couple years, but you could argue it opened around 1980, 1981, 1982 even. I think it opening sometime in the 70s makes the most sense. William and Henry are business partners for this business venture, and William makes the Springlock suits. Part of me is assuming that this might even be after the incident, that like the fire, because the idea of a Springlock suit is necessarily dangerous and stupid, whereas Edwin's costumes can already be worn by a person or an animatronic, and it doesn't risk your entire life to do so. So the idea that they had this technology but used the Springlock suits anyway is idiotic to say the least. So either this is before they contracted Edwin or after the accident. What I could assume to be true is maybe the Springlock suits were created, and then eventually they contract Edwin to maybe make a safer version. And this, eventually they get these suits and they start using them until the fire, which I believe would happen in 1983, and then they are retired. Some other notes this early in the timeline is William has 3 kids, Michael, Dave, and Elizabeth. This timeline is assuming Dave is the crying child. I think it lines up with a lot of the evidence we have, along with BarBADroid's POV or dying in Phasmophobia. It aligns with the guidebook, the survival logbook. There it is. The survival logbook theory that BarBADroid had put out. Michael spends his time fishing at the lake near their house. They live out in the woods, ? It's just assuming the Midnight Motorist house. I'll write that down specifically. And as far as we're aware, Henry has 1 child, Charlotte. And that's Henry Emily and Charlotte Emily. He might have a Sammy, but that we only know that from the books, and there's no evidence of Sammy in the games yet. I think it would be really funny if Sammy is retroactively important in the coming storyline, but it would not make a lot of sense. Moving on. 1980 to 1983, some juicy years. During this time, William Afton creates the sister location bunkers to study animatronics and watch over Dave with psychic friend Fredbear. I think this is basically going into the idea that the sister location bunkers specifically were built before they were utilized for sister location, right? Like this was just kind of the labs that William had and worked within and monitored his children through, and then later were repurposed to focus for sister location. Dave Afton, the crying child, sees an employee being put in a Springlock suit and mistakes it for a person being stuffed in it. So this is kind of explaining how in FNAF 4, there are already rumors about people being killed and put inside of the animatronic suits, even though, like, if this is 1983, the missing child incident likely has not happened yet. So, like, how is that already a rumor? And this is kind of just going back to the Scott line, the things seen in the eyes of a child can be misconstrued, or whatever the hell that quote was. Things seen in the shadows are misconstrued in the eyes of a child, things like that. And we literally, in FNAF 4, see, there's an Easter egg where you can see somebody putting someone in a Springlock suit in the shadowy back room seen by the eyes of a child. So, like, I think that's the explanation there. But William knows that, and knows that he's afraid of them because of this misunderstanding. But through psychic friend Fredbear, reinforces that fear to keep him away from the animatronics. Now, this isn't going into Will Care. I don't want anyone to assume this is a Will Care timeline. It really isn't, but it's assuming that at some point William was at least human and like had human emotions a little bit. Because like, look, I get it. William Afton, terrible father. We all know this. No one's breaking any new ground. No one's blowing any minds by saying William Afton is a terrible father. Frankly, not even really a father, just a guy who helped in the birth of a child. But I think it's more compelling to look at this timeline and go, you know, at some point William was just like a dumb guy, you know, instead of just like from day one he was a unfeeling robotic mastermind who wanted to kill everyone and be an immortal god. Whereas realistically, I think it's more along the lines of he was narcissistic and career oriented and wanted to achieve the best in robotics and was madly jealous of Henry and his skill with animatronics and robotics. And through all of this happening, eventually becomes twisted around the idea of immortality. So at this point in the timeline, it's like, my kid, these animatronics are dangerous, and my kid really likes them, but he's afraid of them because of this. So I'm just gonna like stoke that fear and manipulate him so he doesn't go near them. And also I'm going to have my older son, Michael Afton, watch over him, which, you know, Mike retaliatorily bullies Dave because he's like, I don't want to be stuck watching my kid brother. I want to be a teenager. Rah, 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 rah. During this time, Dave is shedding agony across Fredbear's and the newly opened Freddy's. The idea is that, like, during this time, this is the precursor for Shatter Victim. The idea that when the crying child died, his memories were so scattered and lost to himself that he was not able to move on. And this leans on the idea that in the Silver Eyes, I forget her name, but it's the one with the younger brother, but Mary, maybe? Marie, possibly? She mentions offhand that she thinks that memories are attached to locations. The idea that, like, you can walk into an old cookie store that you used to go to as a kid, and the smell instantly takes you back to a specific memory. That memory is tied to location. And throughout FNAF, it's a really interesting concept that, if I had more time, there's like a multi-hour video essay potential here of just how Five Nights at Freddy's treats memory as a tangible idea. Because it almost, to me, seems that Scott is less interested in actual spirits and more interested in the manifestation of memories as a concept. Because, like, Agony, Remnant, all of these, yes, there is spirit to them, but they seem so much more closely tied to memory, which is really interesting. That's you know, hey, Dawko, in 10 years when you get to do the third Scott Cawthon interview, or 5 years, or however long it takes at this point, please ask him something like that. Ask him, like, just narratively, not for the lore, I'm really interested on how he views memory within Five Nights at Freddy's, because it's really interesting. Anyway, due to Fredbear's success, Will and Henry appeal to investors to get funding for a new venture. Basically, they make a lot of money at Fredbear's, and they're like, we could make this into a bigger thing if we had more people and more funding. So they appeal to investors, and they succeed, which opens the public company Fazbear Entertainment, owning Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Henry builds a new set of animatronics, the Fazbear OGs. So this is kind of going into Secret of the Mimic territory. The issue I'm having with it is Secret of the Mimic establishes 1979 and establishes Freddy Fazbear's Pizza coming soon. So this planning may have been pre-1980. But essentially, like, 1979 being the date that we get from the teaser is really interesting. I hope that's not the date that everything goes down, because that throws a big old wrench into the beginning of this timeline. Maybe that's the date the Mimic was created. I don't know what 1979's significance is yet. Regardless, this goes into Edwin making the Fazbear animatronics, because in the story, The Mimic, he's making metal costumes for Fazbear Entertainment of the Fazbear gang. Like, he's at least making a metal Chica head during most of this story. So it's like, well, if he's doing this and it's in 1979, he's the one who made the OG animatronics. But then there's Henry in FNAF 6 who's like, no, I made them. So what's going on here? I think I don't think I have it written down here. Yeah. I think right now with the information we have, the solution that makes the most sense is originally the public company was like, well, we don't want you to be fully overseeing everything. We want to contract out someone to make even more costumes. So they reach out to Edwin Murray, who owns Murray's Costume Manor, and he begins making these felt suits for the company as well as the Mimic. Whether or not they actually contracted him to make the Mimic is immaterial, because while in the books they didn't contract him, they still collect it anyway, and in the games they said they contracted him, but Fazbear lies a lot, and that could just be that could just be like their legal premise to collect the Mimic and use it. So they reach out to him to make these costumes, it's going well at Fall Fest, it's testing well with audiences, and then there's the fire. The fire that kind of ruins everything. So the felt suits are scrapped and they go, all right, Henry, you win, make some animatronics. And Henry builds the original Freddy Fazbear animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, possibly the puppet. The puppet was created somewhere. The puppet might be an Edwin creation because it is so different and it's also similar to Jackie in that way. But the puppet starts as the security puppet feasibly. And I would think that takes place at Freddy's rather than Fredbear's, but it is admittedly hard to nail down. Moving on to 1983, Freddy Fazbear's is open, Fredbear's is open, sister location is in the background getting ready to open as a third location. On Dave's birthday, Michael and his friends pick him up and make him kiss Fredbear, resulting in the Big Bite, which would later be known as the Bite of 83. So essentially, we all know this is that the Bite of 87 cutscene from FNAF 4. And this is kind of going into Shatter Victim, where, yes, he doesn't die here, but this is like the last conscious memory he has before going into a coma. So his life was so miserable and his fears were so great that in that moment, technically when he dies, but in that moment is when his consciousness shatters and his soul spreads across the anchors he's placed, the parts of his agony that were shed throughout Freddy's and Fredbear's. This is leaning into Shatter Victim, that the crying child cannot move on until all of his memories are collected, all the pieces are put together in one place. William takes him out of the hospital to recover at home, but instead to actually experiment on him to try to get a reaction out of him. And he tries to wake him by inducing horrible nightmares in the FNAF 4 chambers. When that fails, his body is buried in the woods in an unmarked grave to cover up the story and failure from the press. As the Midnight Motorist lump, Dave's largest consciousness wanders around, lost. So that was a lot. What is this talking about? It's the idea that we see illusions in FNAF 4 of a hospital, right? We see the IV bags, the medicine, the flowers, things that you would typically see next to a hospital bed. But if he died in a hospital, it seems unlikely that they would be like, all right, well, here's your dead kid's body, have fun. So that, plus the idea that William would want to hide this story from the press, I think the thing that makes the most sense here is that, yes, the crying child was unresponsive in the hospital. William fights for the legal right to say look, I will keep him and monitor him at home so he can recover better, hopefully. And then once he has full custody, this is the 80s, they're not going to follow up. Once he's at the house, then it's all right, how do I get this kid to wake up? And he builds the FNAF 4 Nightmare Chambers. Now, this is leaning onto Didophobia, where it shows that there are chambers, which is a very piecemeal, very poorly made recreation of the house, of a house, that is filled with hallucinogenic gas to induce horrible nightmares based on mannequins that move on sticks. And those nightmares are one-to-one with the FNAF 4 gameplay we've seen. We also know in the story those chambers are connected to the sister location bunker, because when Rory escapes through it, he ends up at sister location until he eventually gets convinced to go back inside. But obviously this doesn't work, and eventually the crying child is just dead. So I do believe the Midnight Motorist lump is the crying child's body. I think that's, well, shit, I can't have the press find out about this. I'm just going to bury him in the woods, and I'm going to bury him where I know he is. So if I do ever figure this out, maybe I can try to resurrect him. Because this is kind of the beginning of William going surely there's a way to fix this. If he was willing to build the FNAF 4 chambers to try to wake up an unconscious coma victim, this is the beginning of him all right, I can fix this, I can overcome death. And Dave's largest consciousness wanders around. Essentially, just because his soul and consciousness have been shattered doesn't mean he's not an active player. We see this in Andrew in Fazbear Frights, where the majority of the epilogues see Jake and Andrew collecting Andrew's agony, where Andrew is like, I was so angry that I just wanted everything to be as angry as me, and I put my anger into everything. And they find out they're also collecting William Afton's agony, primarily William Afton's agony. But still, even with Andrew's spirit like split up amongst all of this like infection of his own spirit, he is still conscious and able to have conversations with Jake. He just doesn't remember what's going on. He's very confused. He's not able to see or look or anything. And it kind of goes into the idea that it even mentions in the epilogues that Jake can't move, or Andrew can't move on. Like, Jake almost moves on, and he notices that Andrew isn't able to, so he stays until they're able to do this. And once all of the pieces of Andrew are collected, he can move on. You know, like, I'm not the first person to make this connection. I'm fairly certain FNAF has a whole video about, like, it going into the golden duo theory that, yes, there's Jake and Andrew is the aggressor, Jake is the protector, but their situation seems to be flipped for the vengeful spirit of the crying child in Golden Freddy, if you believe in golden duo, where, like, the crying child is the one who can't see or can't hear, according to the logbook, and has pieces that need to be collected, whereas the vengeful spirit is the one who can control Fredbear. Anyway, 1983 continued. Michael constantly sneaks out to visit Dave's grave and go to his favorite fishing spot, but he's not really fishing anymore. He's kind of just staring out into the lake. I didn't explain this last time. I have a whole theory on how I think there's a massive lake near the clearing in Midnight Motorist. This basically goes to the lake that was in the Fall Fest, lobby from Help Wanted, where there's that big lake with a dock that would seem perfect for sitting and fishing. I believe, and looking at the background in that Fall Fest lobby, you see the FNAF 4 house, so it's in the woods. I think it's near the clearing, or at least near, like, I think Fall Fest took place near that lake. And that lake seems to be important for several reasons. I also think, you know, eventually when Mike becomes Old Man Consequences, that's why he's sitting at a lake in the middle of the woods. It's what he likes to do. It's how he clears his mind. So William is frustrated. You know, we see this a bit in Midnight Motorist, but Midnight Motorist hasn't happened yet. But William wants to try to recreate the bite of 83 to see if he can in some way save Dave. Like, okay, I don't want to experiment with Dave's body too much and ruin it, but if I can recreate what happened to him, I can experiment on those victims. So he plans the fun times, and it's a good plan and good blueprints, but he doesn't have the funding or the know-how to actually build it. So William appeals to more investors and finds a way to fund Afton Robotics, LLC. This is the sister location intro cutscene where he's talking to the investors. But he still needs someone to build it, and unfortunately for him, the best person he knows to do this is Henry. So this is my motivation for the death of Charlotte Emily, where William just kind of kills her outside of Freddy's. It's like, why? Why did this happen? Well, one, it's definitely I do think part of it is his weird obsession with Henry, like we see in the Silver Eyes, where, like, people will note that when reading William's journal, he at the same time revered Henry as a god and hated him like the devil, right? So he was just weirdly obsessed with Henry anyway. So the idea that Henry has a perfectly functional family and he doesn't probably gets under his skin. But also, this is a good manipulation tactic. If he kills, I wrote Fredbear's here instead of Freddy's. I think that's still plausible. I go back and forth on it. If Charlotte Emily is now dead, you know, William is able to console Henry, right? William's like, I just went through this myself. Henry, I'm sure, you know, finds a way to blame himself partly for the crying child as well. So, like, it's like we can share in each other's grief and make us feel better. But in his grief, William has that moment of, like, I know it's crazy, but sometimes I can still hear her voice, or still hear his voice. And Henry's like, and especially because Charlotte possessed the puppet, but William doesn't know this yet. But Henry's like, kind of going along with like I think so too. And William's like, I think this sounds crazy, but I think there might be a way to bring them back. And then we get, essentially, William is using this to manipulate Henry to be like, look, I have a plan that if we build these fun times and study how they affect potential victims, we might be able to bring back our kids. Now, and I'm sure he's like, we won't use it on real kids. This is just this like experiment. I just need you to help me build them. And it works. Henry builds the fun times for Williams. Henry builds the fun times for William in his grief. 1983 to 1985. It's during that time that Midnight Motors happens, where after he kills Charlotte, he comes back to find out that Michael snuck out again. And William's all like, how dare he go visit Dave? This is all his fault. He'll pay, right? It's that he'll be sorry when he gets back. William still needs to continue those fear experiments, right? He has these FNAF 4 nightmare chambers, and it didn't work on the crying child, but he is interested to see how it affects someone's psyche if they go through what he thinks the crying child went through. So now, 2 birds with 1 stone. William's like, I can punish Michael for what he did, and I can experiment on him to learn more about fear. So he throws Michael in the FNAF 4 nightmare chambers just to see what will happen. In the meantime, Circus Baby's Pizza World is going well and about to open. But Elizabeth, now without a babysitter because Mike is too busy being tortured forever, keeps getting too close to Circus Baby. It's the idea that, like, William wanted Michael to watch Dave like a hawk. Like, just visualize him at all times, always be keeping eyes on him near the animatronics, and it didn't work. So instead of having Michael watch Elizabeth like a hawk too, he instead has Michael in the FNAF 4 nightmare chambers. But because he's in the nightmare chambers, he can't watch Elizabeth, so it's a bit of a short-sighted plan, as most of William's plans are. So without a babysitter, the day before Circus Baby's Pizza World opens, Elizabeth gets too close and alone with Circus Baby. But instead of kidnapping Elizabeth, as they were programmed to do, it kills her. The plan is abandoned, Circus Baby's Pizza World never opens, and they are put into the bunker for safekeeping. Henry falls into grief after what his creations did. Right, like, he might have found some way to blame himself for Dave. This one was his robot. His robot directly killed William's daughter. So Henry's, like, falling into grief. But William notices the changes in Circus Baby. For after all, her eye color has changed to match Elizabeth. And she's talking like Elizabeth now. Suddenly, William is like, possession might be real. And if it is real, can I study it? So now William needs more information. This is where he gets his first taste of that. Moving on to 1985, William's like, well, I need to see if possession is replicable. So he uses the Spring Bonnie suit to lure and kill Susie, Jeremy, Gabriel, and Fritz, stuffing their bodies into Chica, Bonnie, Freddy, and Foxy, respectively. At first, there is no reaction. Nothing happens. And people are starting to investigate the location. William's running out of time. This is a rough situation to be in. So desperate for a reaction, he tries one more child, Cassidy, and realizes that the Fredbear Springlock suit can do the job for him. Puts Cassidy in the Springlock suit, activates it, and horrifically kills the child. But there is still no visible possession, and Freddy's is closed down from the investigation. The shareholders lock the doors and retain all the assets, including the animatronics, where William cannot access or observe them anymore. Always an opportunist, William manages to frame Henry for this missing child incident and get Henry out of the way. That way, in case Henry ever wants to tell anyone about Circus Baby's Pizza World or finds out about William, no one will believe him because everyone already thinks that Henry did it. Now, it's during this time that Charlotte, as the marionette, helps the missing child incident kids possess the Fazbear suits, giving them their memories and helping all of that. So this is kind of a combination of two things. This is give life for sure. But I do think the visions we see in FNAF 2 and Between Nights is this moment. There's always this confusion about, like, if FNAF 2 is a prequel, why are we getting these cutscenes where it looks like the FNAF 1 location where Freddy is looking at Bonnie and Chica and then eventually the puppet and then eventually going Freddy and then eventually the puppet, right? Like, why is this happening? And I think the most logical explanation is this is give life in person. It's the idea that any time in this franchise, like the FNAF franchise, not the Fazbear, the real world franchise, anytime a FNAF Freddy's location is shut down, they just leave everything there and lock the doors. So I think while the shareholders are maintaining the public assets or the public company assets of Fazbear Entertainment, they basically just lock the doors of Freddy Fazbear's and they're like, no one's in or out. These are our assets, and either we're going to sell them or you're going to make it right. So I think the whole gang is just left there on stage, and that's when Charlotte, as the marionette, finds Susie, Jeremy, Gabriel, and Fritz and Cassidy just in the pizzaplex, or in the pizzeria, not sure what's going on. So she comes up to them and is like, hey, let me show you your bodies, give you your memories back. This is leaning on that alone together idea of like when your own body is found, you get your memories back. And that is what allows them to possess these suits. While doing this, I think Dave's memory is there too. I think they find Dave's spirit, but there's no body they can find. It's not at Freddy's. So he still doesn't really know what's going on, and instead sees these spirits as his friends, the plushies he had in his room. That's the Fredbear plushie he sees in that vision. That's Cassidy, I think, reaching out to him, and that's all he can see. Not to say the FNAF 4 lines are Cassidy speaking, but that's like, if he looks at Cassidy, he sees Fredbear. If he looks at Charlotte, he sees like the marionette. He doesn't get what's going on here. God, I want to do this in one episode. We're 32 minutes in, and I'm at slide 7 of 27. I gotta speed this the fuck up. 1985-1987. William continues to study how the FNAF 4 I have a question. Perfect timing, actually. I have a question to talk about. And it's kind of a big one. So maybe we're not going to get through this whole timeline, but I'm sure going to try. Jaxolotl, they, them. Thank you for your question. I appreciate you taking feedback right now because there was an area of vagueness in your timeline I believe needs more elaboration, this being the fate of the spirits post-FNAF 6 fire. I could bring this up then, but I think it's pertinent to bring up now. You explained at the timeline you see the Happiest Day and FNAF World clock endings as two tellings of the same event, with Charlotte and the MCI spirits helping Dave move on by finding his body. While this conclusion makes sense, this explanation is more aligned with FNAF World, and doesn't attempt to explain the actual events of Happiest Day in FNAF 3. This minigame shows the spirits of Charlotte and 4 of the missing kids, with the last cake being given to another spirit who dons a golden Freddy mask before they all vanish. Because this is a very important moment in the story, I feel a timeline does need specificity about what is happening in this moment. The primary question is, who is the kid in the golden Freddy mask? Given that your explanation mainly involves the spirits helping Dave find rest, my assumption was that you see this kid as representing Dave Afton. The answer makes a lot of sense with the rest of your timeline, but it does raise another point of confusion. Earlier you claimed that Dave does not possess Golden Freddy, but if Happiest Day is depicting Dave as a kid in a Golden Freddy mask alongside 5 other spirits in the masks of the characters they possess, this would very strongly imply Dave possesses Golden Freddy. Alternatively, if you believe this kid is a representation of Cassidy, the spirit you claim to be in Golden Freddy, how would you explain this scene alongside Cassidy's role as the vengeful spirit? If you're characterizing Cassidy as somebody unwilling to move on before enacting retribution, how would Cassidy fit into Happiest Day at all? I don't believe either of these are timeline-breaking options, but I think they require more elaboration and explanation you've provided so far. Excellent point. Thank you for calling that out. I did not specify. Obviously, I'll bring it up again when we get to Happiest Day. You're right. I don't think Dave is possessing Fredbear. I think he is a wandering spirit. But I do think he is the spirit in Happiest Day. Because I think Happiest Day is happening during FNAF 6 Fire and after. Cassidy isn't present because Cassidy is too busy doing Ultimate Custom Night. So the spirits we see there are the main 4, Charlotte and Dave. And then the reason Dave gets the Golden Freddy mask but doesn't possess Golden Freddy is more along the lines of he's finally received the memory of the bite. Right? Like if we're leaning on the idea that you need your memories to move on, and that Happiest Day and FNAF World are them piecing together all these disparate memories, I see these masks they receive in Happiest Day as getting their memory back. Like in Give Gifts, Give Life. Where in Give Gifts, Give Life, they're given the presents, and then they are given the masks. And the mask is what's giving life. I think this mask is representative of getting their memory back, and that's also when they can possess the suit. So I think giving Dave the Golden Freddy mask in Happiest Day isn't necessarily being like, he possesses the Golden Freddy suit, that's why he got the mask. I think it's getting the mask is getting your memory back. I think it's getting the mask is getting your memory back. And his memory is of Fredbear because that was the last thing he saw before he got bit. You know what I mean? I think another way to look at it is theoretically after Happiest Day, he could possess the Golden Freddy suit. Theoretically after Happiest Day, Dave could possess Golden Freddy. But at that point, it's been so long, and it's post FNAF 6, they're in the fire. He just can finally move on now. And that's what they all do, theoretically. So I think you're right that I needed to elaborate that further. But I think in Happiest Day, it's showing them receiving their full memory. And that's what we're seeing Dave receive. And that is very important to specify. So thank you for your question. 1985-1987, William continues to study how the FNAF 4 chambers are affecting Michael. He also studies Circus Baby to see if there's any more he can learn, but he wants to study the originals, currently held by the shareholders in the Freddy's location. If he wants access to them, he needs to reorganize the business from bankruptcy, so he offers the FNAF 2 location plan. Brand new versions of the animatronics to attract new customers, criminal database scans so nothing horrible can ever happen again. Notably, this would only affect Henry because William does not have a criminal record yet. And we can even reuse parts in the original animatronics to save on costs. Like, admittedly, I get why the investors greenlit FNAF 2. This is a good plan. This is like a smart business decision of William being like, look, there'll be brand new versions of these characters that were successful, but it'll reduce that stigma. We can reuse some of the parts from the old animatronics that I know you guys still have, so we can save costs there. And we'll even promote how safe it is by having them be able to scan faces and match it with the criminal database, so no criminals can ever enter this establishment, even though William is the criminal who is not in the database. The plan is approved, and FNAF 2 location begins development. So now it's 1987, and the new Freddy Fazbear's is built. True to his word, William builds the toy animatronics, but the shareholders don't want his name attached to the place because of PR, so he's not the owner of the restaurant, publicly. Anyway, like, he's not the owner, he's not the operator, he's just a guy who works there. They don't want his name attached to this place at all. This kind of just leans on the fact that the FNAF 2 phone call, they're like, we're trying to find the owner of this place, but all we can find is a Fredbear's Family Diner. It's an old place. I'll look into it. They're scrambling because they don't know who the owner is. But he's basically now trying to experiment on these animatronics. He's trying to get a reaction. He's like, well, I mean, Elizabeth possessed Circus Baby. Surely these guys are possessed. Let me try to get a reaction. So he's taking pieces from the old animatronics and using them on the toys. Does this get a reaction? No. He works there as a technician during the day, which means he doesn't get to observe and notice the odd behavior that's happening at night. Jeremy starts getting visions from Gabriel wearing the Freddy mask. This is what I was talking about, where those visions we see in between nights that I believe are give gifts, give life. I think that's when Jeremy, the night guard, is like working at the shift and using this Freddy mask in the location, Gabriel is able to connect to him. And I think Jeremy starts receiving dreams Gabriel is giving him. Like in Alone Together, we see that if a ghost is reaching out to you, they'll affect your dreams. William, desperate for a reaction, once again dons the Spring Bonnie suit and then kills 5 children right in front of the animatronics after hours, and that works. They react. They try to fight back, and he knows possession can be forced and manipulated. He wants to get the suits out of there, but now that the place is under investigation, he can't. It's too risky to go himself. He needs somebody else there to take them apart and bring them back to the bunker. The animatronics also are now fully out of control, and at the next party, an employee shines a flashlight on Withered Foxy, who activates and bites a chunk of his frontal lobe off from the bite of 87. Now, this is a couple things happened here, right? This is basically going to the idea that the DCI was done sloppily and out in the open. Why? I think the idea is it's just William trying to provoke the animatronics. It's like, okay, fine. This will provoke them. I'm going to do what I did to them again in front of them. Surely that'll provoke them. And it does. We see in Save Them that William can rarely encounter the puppet and withered Freddy wandering around trying to stop William. And for some reason, William is able to suplex an animatronic and get out of there. But it's under investigation now, and it's again a publicly traded company, so he doesn't own these things. He can't get in or out. He needs somebody else. And then as far as the Withered Foxy thing, the week before really has a lot of evidence that Foxy did the bite of 87. And I think what makes the most sense is that since the animatronics are already on the fritz and already not locked to a stage, at some point, Ralph implies that an employee kind of like egged it on in a way, and that could just be Ralph reiterating Fazbear propaganda, very likely. But regardless, it seems that Withered Foxy took a chunk out of some employee's frontal lobe. I thought at first I was going to be Cassie's dad, but he explains that the victim can't really do much of anything anymore, so it's probably just a victim that we don't get to see later on. Regardless, like I said, William needs a guy on the inside, so he goes to get Michael out of the nightmare chambers. I put this in quotation marks because, again, I see this as, why is Michael working for William? Is Michael evil? No. I think Michael has been being tortured in the FNAF 4 nightmare chambers for like 3+ years now. And suddenly the nightmares stop and he sees his father, for his knowledge, is a nice man. Not the best father, but look, it's not a screaming nightmare animatronic. And William looks at him and essentially he's like, Michael, oh, thank God I got through to you. I've been trying to stop the nightmares, but I need your help. I know it's strange, but if you can disassemble the animatronics after your shift and bring them home, the nightmares will stop. And I might even be able to save your brother. It's that idea of like, these nightmares are coming from the animatronics. If you take a job at the Freddy's location and disassemble them and give me the parts, I can not only stop your nightmares, but I might be able to fix your mistake, like putting the blame on Michael. That would work on me. If I was in a nightmare chamber for 3 years thinking that I'm just having horrible nightmares and not able to do anything in my life, and suddenly my own father is like, I can stop them if you do this one simple trick. I'm listening. So Michael does this, and this is a funny part in the timeline that it's implied in my timeline, my version of this, that I really like. The fact that Michael is kept in the nightmare chambers when he's not used for the first like half of this timeline results in a Michael Afton who is at the same time incredibly skilled at surviving in Five Nights at Freddy's type scenarios, and also really bad at everything else. Like, he can't hold a job worth shit. He doesn't know how to properly bathe himself. He doesn't remember how to, like, be a good functioning human. But damn, my boy can work doors in a flashlight, right? Like, so Michael does this. Michael does this thing for William, and while he's able to defend himself against the animatronics at night 7 and the custom night, he gets caught trying to take the withered animatronics apart and is promptly fired. That's that really fired on the first day. It's Fritz Smith. He failed. So William was like, it didn't work. Good luck. I'll keep trying. But you might still have those nightmares. And when he's asleep, puts him right back in the chamber. He's basically making him think that it's Michael's fault that he's having these nightmares. The FNAF 2 location is shut down for good, and once again, the assets are retained by the shareholders. The Spring Bonnie suit is sealed in the safe room. However, the new animatronics are deemed a failure and promptly discarded, which lets William find and reclaim them. So I had some points of confusion in the comments about, like, if they're retaining all the assets, why are they just throwing out the toy animatronics? Especially if Withered Foxy was the one who did the bite. To me, it's going on the idea that in the Freddy's location, the first one, right? The animatronics never acted up. It was just a horrible tragedy that Henry did. That the public things Henry did. Whereas in this one, the animatronics were seen to be acting up. People like, they're erratic. They're staring at patrons and like creeping them out. And they were made by William Afton, who, as at this point, Fazbear shareholders are like, I don't trust this guy at all. So to me, it seems like, well, this was a new project that didn't work. We don't need these assets. We'll keep the originals that people like, and we'll just get rid of these toys, and we're going to seal up that bloody Spring Bonnie suit in the back room. And this is the whole, like, the FNAF 3 where, like, everything is being sealed, don't touch it. Which I think happens now. And we'll get into that later, why. But there was something else I wanted to mention here that I can't remember. Oh, yes. And then the DCI not possessing anybody. This goes back to the idea of Alone Together, where if your body is unfound, that's why you are a lingering spirit. But the DCI bodies were just left out and about. So they were found, and they moved on, likely. But since the toys were discarded, William finds them and reclaims them. William melts the toys into a new substance, Remnant. Remnant is the combination of soul, energy/memory, and metal. He uses the scoop, or scooper, to inject that remnant into the Funtime animatronics to once again attempt to induce possession. And this does work. This is the first time he's got a positive result, but they're almost feral/animal-like. Whether or not, and he probably figures this out as time goes on as he's doing these experiments from 87 to 93, but the reason this is producing such a feral animal-like possession is because he's taken the consciousness of 5 people, melted it into one, he's taking half of it because he only has the pieces that were attached to the toys, melted them down into one conglomerate, and then divided it into 3 separate vessels. What he's made is not cognitive enough to be purposeful. It energizes. It does energize, and he's learning the energy properties of Remnant, like we see in the Silver Eyes. This does energize the animatronics, but it doesn't induce a possession. It doesn't give him that immortal life, because this is where I think he starts realizing that if he can take his soul and memory and inject it into a unaging robot, he has achieved immortality. This is his version of immortality. So he needs more Remnant, and he needs to know exactly how this works before he can risk using Elizabeth from Circus Baby or trying anything with Dave's body. Like, he needs more Remnant, and he does have it with Circus Baby and with Dave's body. But until he really nails down this science, he doesn't want to risk it, right? It's the idea of like, I want to perfect this outcome, and then once I'm sure of it, make a child-sized robot and inject the Circus Baby Remnant into it to recreate Elizabeth. And if that works, I can do it to myself. Because at this point, I don't think William is like this family man trying to bring back his family anymore. I think at this point, William is looking at himself, realizing that immortality is achievable right now, and Elizabeth is not necessarily the daughter he's trying to save, but the perfect variable that he knows all of the Remnant there is correct, and if that works, then he knows that he'll be able to do it with himself. So he once again goes to the shareholders and try to open another Freddy's. This time, again, a plan that I could see being approved. It's much less extravagant. This isn't a big plan. This is not any new animatronics. This isn't trying to make a new empire. This is just trying to pay back the investors. Run it cheap, make a return on investment. The idea is like, look, I just want to get these animatronics back and get your investments out of here to save you the headache of everything going on. I'll run the place on a shoestring budget, I'll repair the original animatronics myself, and I'll make enough money to pay you guys back, and I'll just reclaim the animatronics and settle it. For whatever reason, they agree in the hopes to get out of this damn franchise. Like, at this point, these investors have such a sunk cost into this franchise that the idea that, like, even William is like, look, I just want to run this as cheaply as possible to pay you guys back so you don't have to be attached to this anymore. That sounds tempting. So this is when FNAF 1 is opened. I don't know when FNAF 1 opens. I am, at this point, fairly convinced that FNAF 1 takes place in 93, but the actual restaurant was open for a bit. So the FNAF 1 location is opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It's a shoestring budget. Barely any money is used on this place. It's why it looks so dingy and run down in the game, and it's why in the week before, your security guard is also your janitor, is also your manager, is also so many things. The only purpose is to make the money back to the shareholders have invested so William can legally claim the animatronics to experiment on them. He doesn't say that part, but like he wants to claim them to get them out of here. Several years go by, and Freddy's is not doing well. The stigma lingers around the place, as does its poor hygiene and acrid smell. William won't be able to make enough to buy back the animatronics. He might not make enough to keep the lights on. The investors are starting to get antsy and like it's just kind of losing them money again. So once again, he gets desperate, and he needs someone to steal them away from the place before it closes on its end. So the week before takes place around this time, and then, oh, Michael, you have one last shot. He lets Michael out and again tells him if he can disassemble these animatronics and bring them back, William can stop the nightmares, but he needs to be discreet. And this is when FNAF 1 happens. Michael, under the name Mike Schmidt, takes up the job of night security guard in the hopes of taking apart the animatronics for his father. He survives a week, but is ultimately caught trying to take them apart and is promptly fired. FNAF 1 location is closed for good. Now, we know that this would happen, right? Because in the in the week before. I forget exactly which ending it is, but there is one ending where as Ralph, you can like break one of the animatronics, and the next day you're sent a bill where it's like, hey, you did this, we're suing your ass and you work for us forever now. And or like, hey, you're fired and your money is our money until this gets fixed. So like we know people are checking up on this. So he gets caught trying to take them apart and is fired. FNAF 1 location, the investors are like, God damn it, this keeps happening. We're just losing money. It's not worth it. And they close it down for good. William, desperate as always, tells Michael to let him do it. William knows this is dangerous. That's why he wants a fall guy. But Michael can't do anything right. So he goes, Michael, here are instructions for the fun times if I don't make it back. There's a bunker in our house. If I don't make it back, do this and your nightmares will go away. After it's closed, William breaks into the FNAF 1 location and breaks open the safe room, one by one, tricking them, using the entrance of the room that they are not programmed to be able to enter, and disassembles them, taking some pieces back every night to add to the remnant of the sister location animatronics. So this is follow me, right? This is William being like, all right, every night I'm going to go here. He breaks into the safe room, and the animatronics are programmed to not know that room exists. They can't enter it. They don't know it doesn't make sense in their programming. So all he has to do is like lead them to it. And once they get confused, sneak up, turn it off, take it apart. But the fun times, even after 4 nights of this, are still wild and won't listen. So he needs one more thing and realizes if they're still not listening to him, maybe he can use the Spring Bonnie suit to manipulate them to listen. But this is when we get the last night of Follow Me, where the spirits cut him off and he puts on that damp Springlock suit to try to defend himself, setting off the Springlocks and dying. Nobody knew he was going to be in there, and the buildings were just about to be locked up to never used again. So William is dead in the safe room. The MCI victims attempt to find the rest of their souls to find peace, eventually finding the conglomerate of the fun times and merge with them. Charlotte and Cassidy, however, stay to keep an eye on William, who seems to still be present in this world, as their remnant. So Cassidy and Charlotte are an interesting case, because their pieces were left together, essentially. Like the Springlock suit of Cassidy wasn't useful for any of the toys, and the puppet was just reused, so they aren't in the fun times. They are separate. So they stay to keep an eye on William while the MCI victims go to find the fun times. William still seems to be present in this world, so they're keeping an eye on him. Now, William is at this point fused to the Springlock suit, but the suit, he died because the Springlock suit activated and went into suit mode, right? Because that's what crushes him. And the suit's programming isn't allowing it to function in the safe room. He's stuck in a seated show mode until he's eventually found. So I think this is why William Afton is missing in this. It's not because the safe room gets sealed with him inside. He broke in to get there. But since he's in the safe room, this activated Springlock suit just doesn't know what to do and won't go anywhere. We know from FNAF 3 he is beholden to the programming of the Springlock suit because he chases after the Balloon Boy noise. But we'll find him later, after when we get to FNAF 3. Michael, at this point, has ongoing nightmares based on the Nightmare Chambers and his experiences thus far. This is the FNAF 4 night gameplay we get. And the reason I say this is the FNAF 4 night gameplay is because we hear that FNAF 1 phone call in reverse, and it only makes sense if it's taking place right now. Otherwise, that just doesn't exist, and it's the crying child's nightmares. Who knows? So, after enough time passes, Michael goes for plan B. William hasn't come back, so he follows the instructions his father gave him and makes his way into the sister location bunker in their house. I don't want to do this as a two-parter, but I'm about halfway through this timeline. And it's 55 minutes. I don't want to do this as a two-parter. We might do this as a two-parter. No, this is the timeline. Do I have any other questions I can answer right now? I think I have to do this as a two-parter. I wanted to do this in one big grand finale, and I realized we're approaching an hour of this podcast, and I'm barely halfway through the timeline. So I think we need to do this as a two-parter. As much as I hate to say it. So this is, I guess, part 1 of the finale. The part 2 is going to be sister location onward. So again, if you have any questions for this timeline, especially sister location onward, now is the time to ask them, because I will be checking that for this timeline review. But I guess my main point is, in the comments, let me know, what do you think of this timeline so far? I really like how this timeline came out. Again, we're not finished, so there's that. Because, like, we're almost through the Scott Games era. We have a lot of Steel Wool era to get through as well. So I think here makes the most sense. I could go through FNAF 6, but then part 2 might be offset. So I think stopping here makes sense. We're about halfway through the linear timeline of this. I guess we're going to part 2 it. So let me know what you think of it so far. And if you have any questions on the second half of the timeline, now's the time to ask them. And you can send those questions into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That's in the description to copy and paste because it's a pain to type out. Once again, if you have not done it yet, get yourself a Mark plushie. You only got like 5 days left at this point. But until next time, thank you for watching Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.